What if the fairy tale wedding that stopped the world, the white dress, the royal carriage, the cheering crowds, was built on a secret so explosive that the very people who helped create Meghan Markle's life were slowly erased just to keep it buried? What if the man who once drove her to auditions, paid for her classes, and believed in her dream long before the palace gates opened had been holding a truth for more than 2 decades? And now, at 80 years old, after heart attacks, strokes, and years of silence, Thomas Markle says he's done protecting it.
And do something and wait 30 days to get a response from Meghan and Harry. If it didn't get it.
Yeah, and so, in a way, and she's completely rewritten him out of history. Now, we know around the wedding...
Meghan Markle has finally reached out to her father, Thomas Markle, who is fighting for his life in an intense...
Thomas Markle didn't stand behind a podium. He didn't leak documents to tabloids or sell an exclusive headline. Instead, he sat down, looked straight into a camera, and began talking. Slowly at first, carefully, like someone who had spent years deciding whether this moment would ever come. And then the words landed. Heavy, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore. According to Thomas, Meghan underwent a hysterectomy when she was just 19 years old. Let that sink in for a moment, because this isn't a distant relative chasing attention. This isn't an anonymous source with a grudge. This is the man who paid for her schooling, the man who bought her first acting headshots, the father who drove her to casting calls and told her she could be anything she wanted to be, the man who was there before the cameras, before the palace, before the title of Duchess ever existed. And he says he carried this secret for more than 20 years, not because he wanted to, because she asked him to. Back then, he says she trusted him completely. Back then, he was simply her dad. But as Meghan's world grew bigger, shinier, more global, something else began shrinking. Thomas Markle's place in her life. It didn't collapse overnight. It happened slowly, almost invisibly. Phone calls became shorter. Birthdays passed without messages. Conversations that once felt easy started sounding strangely formal, like two people who were suddenly careful about every word they spoke. And then eventually, silence. His name faded from interviews, disappeared from documentaries, vanished from the carefully constructed story Meghan told the world about herself. And Thomas watched it all from a distance. The daughter he once knew becoming a duchess, a global celebrity, the centerpiece of Netflix productions and international headlines. Yet every time someone asked him about her, he held back, protected her, even while she kept pushing him further away. But time changes things. Thomas Markle is 80 years old now. He survived a heart attack, a stroke, years of living thousands of miles away from grandchildren he has never even met. At one point, he sent a letter from a hospital bed, hoping for some kind of response. None came, not even from Harry. And somewhere along the way, the reason for staying silent simply ran out. Thomas says he isn't doing this for fame or money. According to him, it's about something far simpler. A secret he carried for decades that, in his own words, doesn't deserve to go to the grave. And what he claims he's been sitting on goes deeper than one medical detail. It goes back to a phone call, May 2018, just days before the most watched royal wedding in decades. While the world prepared for celebration, Thomas was lying in a hospital bed in Mexico recovering from surgery. Weak, fragile, still processing what had happened to his health. That's when his phone rang. It was Meghan. You might imagine a call like that would begin with concern. A daughter asking how her father was feeling. Maybe a quiet moment of reassurance before the chaos of a royal wedding. But Thomas remembers something very different. According to him, the conversation felt tense from the very first word. No warm greeting. No question about his recovery. Just urgency. Like she had something specific she needed to say, something that couldn't wait. And then came the request that stunned him. Meghan allegedly asked him to destroy every medical document connected to her early adult years. Not store them, not hide them away. Destroy them completely. Every paper, every file, every trace. Thomas says the tone of her voice was unlike anything he had ever heard from her before. Controlled, rehearsed, as if each sentence had been practiced in advance. He remembers her telling him one thing very clearly. No one ever needs to know what happened in that hospital. For Thomas, that sentence changed everything. Until that moment, he had convinced himself the distance between them was temporary, a side effect of royal pressure, media chaos, and the sudden spotlight surrounding Meghan's life. But hearing those words stripped away that illusion. This wasn't about privacy anymore. This was about making sure the past disappeared entirely. Then the call ended with a sentence that echoed long after the line went silent. "Don't contact me again. If you care about me, you won't." Thomas says he sat there on the edge of the hospital bed, the phone still in his hand, staring at the wall, trying to understand how things had reached this point. Was she scared? Was someone advising her to say these things? He still doesn't know. What he does know is that after that moment, everything stopped. No messages, no wedding invitation, just silence. Weeks later, a cream-colored envelope arrived at his door. Thomas says he recognized the handwriting immediately. Meghan's. He stood outside on his patio holding it for nearly an hour before opening it, rain falling lightly around him, a single bulb flickering above his head, something inside him already sensing that whatever those pages contained would change things forever. When he finally opened it, he found 7 pages, every line written carefully, no corrections, no scribbles, just precise sentences that felt less like a daughter writing to her father and more like a carefully prepared statement. The first detail that struck him was small but painful. She didn't call him Dad, not once, just Thomas, over and over again. Further down the letter came accusations, claims that he had spoken to media, claims that he failed to protect her privacy, and then a line that froze him completely. She wrote about documents he was still holding, documents she insisted no longer belonged to him. According to Thomas, the letter continued with an unmistakable request: destroy them, shred them, burn them if you have to. Don't leave them for someone else to find. He read that sentence again and again because it didn't sound like someone asking for discretion. It sounded like an order. Buried deeper in the pages was another line that hit even harder. There are consequences to holding on to what doesn't belong to you anymore. Thomas says he understood the message immediately. Not loud, not aggressive, but unmistakably clear. The final page ended without warmth, without affection, just a simple statement that she was moving forward and that it would be the last time she reached out. When Thomas finished reading the letter, he didn't destroy anything. Instead, he packed the documents into a fireproof box and locked them away. Not to hurt her, but because, in his words, those papers represented a version of her story that couldn't be rewritten. To understand why those documents mattered so much, you have to go back much further, back to the summer of 2000. Meghan was 19 years old, home from Northwestern University, and according to Thomas, something wasn't right. Fatigue, severe cramping, the kind of pain that didn't simply disappear after a few days. At first, they blamed stress, college pressure, being away from home, but eventually, doctors raised the possibility of something more serious. Thomas says Meghan was terrified of anyone finding out. She asked him not to tell Samantha, not to tell anyone, just help her get through it quietly. And that's exactly what he says he did. He paid for the procedure out of pocket. No insurance, almost no paper trail, just a father trying to take care of his daughter the only way he knew how. The clinic was small, private, hidden in West Hollywood. The kind of place where discretion wasn't just promised, it was expected. Meghan checked in under a pseudonym, Patient 1472. No last name, just a number on a file. Thomas was supposed to pick her up after the procedure, but when he arrived and walked into the hallway, something unexpected happened. Meghan wasn't alone. Standing beside her was a woman he didn't recognize. Short, dark hair, designer sunglasses, a firm grip on Meghan's shoulder. At first, he assumed she worked there, maybe a nurse, maybe a staff member. But when Meghan looked up and saw him, the expression on her face wasn't relief. It was panic. When journalists began asking questions decades later, the responses were cautious. Reporters who visited the clinic in 2024 encountered security at the gate and warnings that visitors were not welcome. Emails sent by journalists pretending to be potential patients reportedly went unanswered. Then in 2025, the clinic quietly announced a strategic restructure. Patient records were moved to a secure offshore server in Switzerland, making access far more difficult than before. Thomas says he once tried contacting the clinic himself simply to confirm his memory of the events. The response he received was short and formal. They could neither confirm nor deny that Meghan had ever been treated there. There was one more person connected to the clinic, a former nurse Thomas refers to as Marina. She worked overnight shifts for several years and later left California entirely. In a private conversation Thomas says he recorded but never released publicly, she allegedly confirmed that Meghan had been a patient there. She described a young woman who appeared frightened and withdrawn. When pressed for further details, the nurse stopped talking. And that is where the story becomes less about a medical procedure and more about the silence surrounding it. Thomas Markle repeatedly says he is not accusing Meghan of doing anything wrong by seeking medical care at 19. He understands why something so personal would remain private. What troubles him, he says, is something else entirely. The idea that people who once stood beside her were slowly pushed out of her life because they remember remembered parts of her story that no longer fit the image presented to the world. Look at the people orbiting this story. The ex-husband who never spoke publicly. The sister who says she saw a file but was dismissed as unreliable. The nurse who remembered details but refused to elaborate. The clinic that moved its records overseas. And at the center of it all, Thomas Markle. The father who paid for the procedure, kept the documents, and stayed silent for more than 20 years. Thomas says he isn't asking for reconciliation anymore. That hope faded long ago. What he says he wants now is simpler. To not be remembered as the villain of the story. To place at least one version of events on record that didn't pass through a public relations team or a television production first. Whether people believe him or not is another question entirely. But secrets that are carried for decades rarely disappear quietly. They sit in locked boxes, old photographs, distant memories, and sometimes in places no one expected them to resurface. And according to Thomas Markle, the moment for silence is finally over.